at this press conference. There will be an opportunity for questions from the media after the presentation of the statement, but with no further ado, I'll hand the floor to Tana to start that.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your presence here this afternoon. This statement of preliminary findings and conclusions is the result of what we call a common endeavour involving the Office for Democratic Institutions and Human Rights, the Council of Europe Parliamentary Assembly, and the European Parliament. The assessment was made to determine whether the elections complied with OSCE commitments and other international obligations and standards for democratic elections and with national legislation. Our own mission includes 11 experts in the capital, and we had 16 long-term observers across the country since mid-March. On election day, 152 observers from 39 countries were deployed, including 97 long and short-term observers deployed by ODIHR, as well as a 17-member delegation from the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe and a 13-member delegation from the European Parliament. Opening was observed in 50 polling stations and in over 500 polling stations throughout the day during the voting. The count was observed in 47 polling stations and the tabulation in 17 municipal electoral commissions. I would like to thank the authorities for their invitation to observe this election, and the State Election Commission and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs for their assistance, and also to express our appreciation to the state institutions, the political parties, the civil society organizations, and the representatives of the international community, some of whom are here today, for their cooperation with our work. I will briefly illustrate our principal findings. Fundamental freedoms were respected in the 15 April presidential election, although the candidate nominated by the governing party held an institutional advantage. Candidates campaigned freely, and the media provided contestants with a platform to present their views. The lack of analytical reporting and the absence of the front-runner in the televised debates reduced voters' opportunity to make an informed choice. The technical aspects of the election were adequately managed, although the transparency and professionalism of the State Election Commission remain issues of concern. Election day proceeded in an orderly manner, despite a few procedural irregularities. The legal framework overall provides a sound basis for the conduct of democratic elections, and recent amendments that incorporated a number of ODIHR and Council of Europe Venice Commission recommendations signal a general willingness to engage in electoral reform. It occurred to me that I did not mention that we were joined in observation also by representatives of the Venice Commission, whom we thank for their presence here during these days and for their assistance in compiling this opinion. The lack of regulations on dispute resolution procedures, tabulation of results, and campaign finance undermined the integrity of the electoral process, however. Attempts by the State Election Commission to clarify some aspects of the legislation through instructions lacked consistency. The campaign activities of the 7 candidates who ran, 6 men and, for the first time, 1 woman, were generally low-key. Opposition and civil society representatives voiced concerns about the institutional advantage enjoyed by the candidate nominated by the governing party, which holds power for the past 27 years. They also alleged widespread hiring of public employees, despite restrictions on doing so during election period, vote buying and collecting identification documents to prevent voters voting. These recurrent and at times credible allegations of pressure on voters to support the ruling party had a negative impact on the environment. Such practices are at odds with paragraph 7 of the 1990 OSCE Copenhagen document and Council of Europe Venice Commission Code of Good Practice in Electoral Matters. Election day generally proceeded in an orderly manner, despite a few procedural irregularities, as I noted. Voting and counting were assessed positively in almost all polling stations observed. The tabulation process was assessed positively in the 17 municipal election commissions observed. International Election Observation Mission observers reported indications of vote buying and the use of lists to track which voters had already voted, and municipal commissions received 6 complaints alleging such violations. For the first time, the State Election Commission made polling station results available online in real time. The media monitored by our mission provided candidates sufficient opportunities to address voters, but a lack of analytical reporting characterized their coverage. The public broadcaster fulfilled its duties to provide candidates with free airtime. In addition, it organized interviews with candidates and aired 2 debates, although, as noted above, the candidate nominated by the governing party did not attend. The monitored private media were aligned along political lines. With no legal limits on the amount of paid advertising, candidates who could afford purchasing more airtime had an advantage. At the end of last year, in a controversial decision and an issue which touches the issue of media independence, Parliament replaced 2 members of the Public Service Broadcasting Council, RTCG, and 1 member of the media regulator, the Agency for Electronic Media, due to alleged conflict of interest. These early dismissals directly challenged the autonomy and independence of RTCG and of the AEM. The decisions appeared disproportionate to the gravity of violations that could have been remedied by resolving the conflicts of interest. At its first meeting on 20 March, the RTCG Council replaced the President. The OSCE representative of freedom of the media underlined last month the importance of safeguarding the independence of public broadcaster. While attacks on journalists have decreased in recent years, during our presence in the country on 1st April, a bomb exploded in front of the house of a journalist in Bielopolye, an act of intimidation police believed was linked to his professional activities, but not to the election. 2 persons were arrested and the inquiry is ongoing. The State Election Commission met most legal deadlines, but lacked transparency as decisions were not published and its sessions were not open to the media. Although State Election Commission sessions were regular, they were frequently insufficiently prepared. The election law does not contain provisions on impartiality or professionalism of election management bodies, and several opposition members and representatives of the media and observer groups expressed their concern that decisions were being made along party lines. Attempts by the SEC to clarify some aspects of the legislation through instructions and decisions lacked consistency. The municipal election commissions, which we observed, were mostly open for observers, but only some posted their decisions online. The accuracy of the voter list was a concern during our period in the country with a number of our interlocutors, including opposition parties and civil society organizations, who alleged that it might contain voters living abroad and those deceased, and could be potentially used to inflate turnout. However, during our period in the country, no evidence of such practices was produced and no complaints were filed. Public scrutiny of the voter list started on 21 January and ended on 31st March. During this period, citizens could make requests for corrections in their data on the Ministry of Interior website or in person. A total of 12,282 requests for corrections were made, including over 1,000 requests of change of residence. At the request of a registered observer group on the 2nd April, the Ministry of Interior ran a cross-check between databases to verify the possibility of duplicate registration. We note this as an attempt to dispel doubts and increase transparency. After the State Election Commission introduced an online application in the laudable intent to allow voters to check if their name had appeared in support of a candidate, however, 1,000 complaints were filed alleging that voters' signatures had been forged or voters' personal data had been misused in supporting signature lists. Although candidate registration was impaired by these procedural irregularities, it was inclusive, and all the candidates who submitted nomination documents were registered. In the pre-election period, one complaint was submitted to a municipal election commission and 3 to the State Election Commission regarding the appointments of polling chairpersons. In practice, election dispute resolution, however, depends on the discretion of different public authorities, which at times fail to ensure effective legal redress, at odds with paragraph 5 of the 1990 Copenhagen document. We also note that the opposition candidate filed a complaint alleging false ID cards in certain location. We will follow this complaint during the rest of our period in the country. Thank you very much for your attention.
Okay, thank you, Tana. And now Jonas, please.
Thank you. Dear ladies and gentlemen, first of all, I would like to mention that I share the preliminary conclusions of the International Election Observation Mission presented by Mrs. De Zulueta, head of the OSCE or the Election Observation Mission. The Parliamentary Assembly delegation was composed of 13 members of the Assembly, representing all 6 political groups and 9 Council of Europe member states. The delegation was accompanied by the legal experts of the Council of Europe Venice Commission. The Parliamentary Assembly has been observing all presidential and parliamentary elections in Montenegro since 2001. We were invited by the authorities of Montenegro to observe the presidential election because Montenegro is under the post-monitoring dialogue regime with the Parliamentary Assembly and has the commitment to invite our Assembly to observe elections. Therefore, I would like to thank the authorities of the country for having invited our organization to observe the election and also for their spirit of cooperation. Yesterday, for polling, we sent 8 teams of observers to Podgorica and surrounding areas, as well as in different regions of Montenegro. Our observers noted that yesterday's voting and counting were well organized. Voters made their choice in a free manner among 7 presidential candidates. However, elections is not limited to the voting day only. As for the election campaign, we and the ODIHR long-term observers were informed about cases of misuse of state and administrative resources, credible allegations of pressure on voters in favor of the ruling party candidate. Regrettably, those problems are recurrent from one election to another in this country. There is another question that I would like to mention. The TV debates among presidential candidates is a democratic procedure allowing voters to make informed choice. In this regard, our delegation regrets that the ruling party's candidate did not attend the debates. We are convinced that there is still room for improvement of the electoral legal framework of Montenegro in electoral matters and electoral practices. Therefore, I invite the authorities of the country to continue their close cooperation with the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe Venice Commission and the Council of Europe Venice Commission in order to improve the quality of the elections. Our Assembly will adopt its report on the observation of the presidential elections at its standing committee meeting, which will take place in Zagreb on the 1st of June 2018. Finally, I would like to point out the excellent work done by the members of the polling station and also by the domestic observers. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. All right, as mentioned, we have opportunity now for questions from journalists. I'll ask you, please, if you have a question, to raise your hand so we can have a microphone brought to you. Before asking your question, also, if you could please provide your name as well as the media outlet for which you work.
Should I speak in English?
There's translation, so whichever with which you're more comfortable.
Darwin Murić, novinar Vijesti. Novoizabrani predsjednik je u toku kampanje
I'm sorry, just one moment. I think we're okay now.
novoizabrani predsjednik je u toku kampanje za Vijesti i dio nevladinog sektora rekao da su fašisti. Da li će to ući u izvještaj vaše organizacije? Toliko.
I'm afraid the microphone isn't working and the interpreter says she could not hear the question. Yes, I said his microphone, not yours.
I'll just ask in English, is that okay?
Yes, it's okay.
The ruling party candidate in mid-campaign called Vijesti and part of NGO fascist. Will that statement of his be a part of your report? Thank you.
The use of inflammatory language in the campaign is an issue we have observed in some instances, and we have tried to take note of all the examples, including the one you mentioned.
Other questions? Okay, I guess that's a sign that we've explained things pretty well right from the beginning. So all that's left is to thank you, first of all, for joining us here this afternoon and point out that copies of the preliminary statement we're presenting today in both English and the local language are available on the table on your way out, as will be the press release for the preliminary statement. And I wish you a wonderful rest of the afternoon. Oh, sorry, and also a statement, again, as I mentioned earlier, Mr. Castaldo could not be with us today from the European Parliament, and his statement, the delegation statement, can also be found outside.